Sarah has done everything right. She has a good job, she earns $78,000 a year, she doesn't overspend, she doesn't carry credit card debt, and every single month she moves $400 into her savings account. After 4 years, she has $19,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account. She calls it her emergency fund. She's proud of it. She should be. But here's what nobody told Sarah. That $19,000 is quietly costing her more than she knows. Not because she spent it recklessly, not because she made a bad decision, but because she never stopped to ask one question. How much is actually enough? And that one unanswered question is the difference between saving money and building wealth. According to a 2025 Bankrate survey, 57% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency with cash. That statistic circulates constantly as proof that people need bigger emergency funds. Save more, keep more liquid, be responsible. But buried in the same report was a finding almost nobody talks about. Among people who do have emergency savings, nearly 40% are holding significantly more than financial experts recommend. Not a little more, significantly more. They built the savings habit, then they never stopped, and the money kept accumulating in accounts that are doing the least possible work for them. This is the emergency fund trap, and it catches some of the most financially disciplined people alive. Let's start with what an emergency fund is actually supposed to do. The standard recommendation is 3 to 6 months of living expenses held in a liquid account you can access immediately. This money has one job: to cover genuine disruptions without forcing you into debt. Job loss, medical bills, a car engine that fails on a Tuesday. That's it. That's the entire purpose. The emergency fund is not an investment. It is not a savings goal to grow indefinitely. It is insurance against disruption. And like all insurance, it has a cost. In this case, the cost is opportunity. Here's the math most people never run. Sarah keeps $19,000 in a high-yield savings account earning 4.5% interest. That earns her roughly $855 per year. The balance grows. Everything looks fine. But her actual monthly expenses are $3,200. 5 months of coverage puts her true emergency fund target at $16,000. The remaining $3,000 is excess capital, sitting in an account built for safety, not growth. If that $3,000 had been invested in a broad market index fund instead, at the historical average return of approximately 10% annually, it would grow to roughly $7,800 in 10 years. The savings account version? Around $4,700. That's a $3,100 difference from one small reallocation. Now extend that across a career. If Sarah redirects just $200 per month in excess savings into investments starting at age 30, at historical market averages, she accumulates approximately $435,000 by age 65. The same $200 kept in savings at 4% becomes roughly $198,000. That's a gap of $237,000 from one shift made once. She didn't lose it through bad decisions, she just never let it become what it could have been. The psychology behind this trap is more interesting than the math. Behavioral economists call it loss aversion. The pain of losing something feels roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the equivalent amount. Losing $500 hurts more than gaining $500 feels good. This is hardwired into how humans process risk. Emergency funds activate that instinct in a very specific way. The money in that account represents protection, safety, the absence of fear. Touching it, even to invest it wisely, triggers the same psychological alarm as losing it. So people don't touch it, they add to it, and the balance drifts past any rational need without anyone noticing. There's also something called the illusion of safety. A large savings balance looks like financial health. It feels like financial health. But financial health and financial growth are not the same thing. A 2024 Empower survey found that Americans with over $50,000 in liquid savings actually reported higher financial anxiety than people with $25,000 in savings and $25,000 in investments. The same total net worth, completely different psychological outcomes. Because money sitting still creates its own kind of worry. It whispers, is this enough? Should it be more? What if something happens that costs more than this? The emergency fund becomes a bottomless number. No amount ever feels like enough because the target was never defined clearly in the first place. This is where tiered liquidity changes everything. Most people organize money into two buckets: savings and investments, safe and risky, liquid and locked up. Financially intentional people think in three tiers. Tier 1 is the true emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of actual living expenses in a high-yield savings account. This number has a ceiling. Once funded, you stop adding to it. Tier 2 is the opportunity fund, money you might need within 1 to 3 years, a house down payment, a planned career transition, a known large expense. This lives in a high-yield account or short-term treasury notes, accessible but earning more than a checking account. Tier 3 is long-term wealth. Everything beyond tiers 1 and 2 belongs here. Index funds, retirement accounts, assets that work for decades, not months. The problem for Sarah, and for millions like her, is that all of her surplus ends up in Tier 1, when most of it belongs in Tier 3. She hasn't made a mistake, she just never graduated from the first tier. There's one more dimension that most people completely overlook: inflation. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, the average annual inflation rate over the past decade has been approximately 3.4%. A savings account earning 4.5% in a 3.4% inflation environment generates about 1.1% in real returns, before taxes. After taxes on interest income, the real return on excess emergency savings may be close to zero. You are not growing your purchasing power. You are barely maintaining it. When savings rates fall, and historically they do, the math gets worse. People holding excess savings through 2020 and 2021 earned approximately 0.06% annually, while inflation ran above 7%. The emergency fund kept them safe. It also quietly eroded their wealth in ways they couldn't see. So what does the fix actually look like? Sarah does one calculation. Her monthly expenses are $3,200. She wants 5 months of coverage. Her target is $16,000. She has $19,000. That means $3,000 of her savings has no assigned job. She opens a brokerage account. She moves that $3,000 into a diversified index fund. She changes her automatic monthly transfer from savings to investments because her emergency fund is already fully funded. She checks her emergency fund once a year. If her expenses rise, she adjusts the target upward. If she ever uses it, she rebuilds it before resuming investment contributions. That is the entire strategy. Not complicated, not risky, not a dramatic overhaul. Just a clear definition of what enough looks like, and a decision about where every dollar above that number belongs. It's worth saying clearly, the emergency fund is not the enemy. For millions with nothing saved, building that cushion is the right first priority. Financial anxiety is real, and the psychological value of knowing you can handle a crisis doesn't show up in a spreadsheet. The goal is not to minimize your emergency fund to maximize returns. The goal is to define it precisely so you know the difference between protection and paralysis. Defined money feels safer than undefined money, even when the defined amount is smaller. Because when you know exactly what your emergency fund is for, everything above that number finally has a direction. The personal finance conversation has spent decades pushing one message: save more, keep more liquid, protect yourself. That advice helped an entire generation escape the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle. But the same advice quietly traps a different group: the responsible savers. The people who built the habit, never stopped, and ended up with a perfectly funded account that limits their future without them ever realizing it. Sarah doesn't need to take more risk. She just needs one number: a clear, defined ceiling on what her emergency fund is actually for. And once she has that number, everything above it gets to work. Financial security isn't built by keeping money safe. It's built by knowing exactly which money to keep safe and letting everything else grow.